John Mayer, one of the few modern pop artists that I think really deserves respect from listeners of all genres.
I agree that he definitely deserves more respect and put on a pedestal higher just due to his sheer talent and his education. I know he went to Berkeley for a few years, and he's definitely inspired a lot of new artists.
I wasn't too hot on his latest album, Sob Rock, because I felt like, what are John Mayer's two biggest strengths?
His singing and his guitar.
Right, so the producer's like, yeah, so let's turn both of those all the way down, and this 80s synth, ready?
That's because, like you said, The Weeknd exploded, and they're like, we need synth in our song.
Well, much of his stuff I found to be a little bit too safe, inoffensive, and formulaic at sometimes. At his best, he stands out light years ahead of his peers in this genre.
Definitely more in the formula range, but it's part of the formula where he sticks out enough where he's able to be picked out of a crowd rather than just a sea of just the same crap.
I wanted to also find an album that really showcased this talent. I went looking for his...
Sorry.
I wanted to really find an album that showcased his talent well, and after hearing the song Neon, I figured this would be a great album to check out. That song, utterly spectacular. What better place to start with John Mayer than the debut? And I have to say, he is much more creative a musician than a guitar designer. I had to squeeze that in somewhere. Without further, Bovine Excrement, No Such Thing. Even though the song structure isn't too complex, what makes this song impressive is John's ability to sing with the softness and emotion he does while strumming so rapid fire. It's actually pretty funny watching the live version. You hear his voice like all soft and nice, and it actually looks like he's taking a fat shit.
The acoustic and then an electric guitar mix for the intro. So he is in the formula, but those things allow him to stick out of it.
I don't know, this may be a offensive comparison for you, but for example, we get to Neon, but some of the stuff that he plays just like this one and sings at the same time, I haven't really heard a guy do something that complex other than maybe Geddy Lee. The vocal melody is one of the best parts of the song, especially the first verse where he changes from a major to a minor tone and then right back so smoothly.
It's also somewhat hard to hear the bass player at times, but he is doing his own version of the melody, which adds a great layer to the rest of the song.
Another key element that I think makes John special in this genre is the fact that he doesn't need much heavy lifting production-wise in order to sound great. If you listen to live renditions of this, it pretty much sounds exactly like the studio track. That being said, one of the many reasons I'm glad the radio is dead because they pick the songs from albums that are nowhere near the best. It's still a solid track, I liked it, but there isn't much songwriting wise or structurally that blows me away, especially in comparison to some of the other songs on this album, so I give it a 6.5.
I give it a 6.5 as well.
Many of the same things that I said about the previous track apply here. The acoustic melody and John's use of percussion elements is very impressive, but it is looped frequently without much variation.
But it is another strong acoustic guitar intro, mixed with a little bit of slaps. The lyrics are strong. I think for this one, he wanted to focus more on the story of the song. I like the lightly placed chords in the background too, during kind of like the bridge. But yeah, you kind of got the whole gist of the song the first almost 2 minutes.
David Labriere was fantastic on bass, though. Added some great bass lines to the track, which, like you said, I wish we could hear a little bit. Could have used a little bit more variation, but I definitely don't hate it. I give it a 6.
6 as well.
You remember the Wolfgang Van Halen review?
Yes.
Yeah. He sticks to the formula that works, and there's nothing wrong with that. Much needed change up in the track list up to this point. Really one of his signature songs, the layering of several of John's techniques on guitar gives this one a much stronger instrumental backbone.
I love, again, how the bass complements the guitar well. More of a romantic sing-along song, kind of his staple, but definitely captures it perfectly in this song.
Highlighted by the interesting percussion accents that are added in. The first real production issues I noticed up to this point too, it's just compressed to shit. It's like bam. And at points it kind of dulls a lot of those highs, and I think John Mayer's music really calls for a lot of the softness that you need. So I use I think 2 compressors on this audio because sometimes you talk like this and then you can't hear anything. So
I wanted to attract our ASMR viewers. That does well on YouTube.
Another heavily abused radio song on this one, but listening in detail made me appreciate it actually much more than I remembered. But one of the better ones on the record, I thought, so I gave it a 7.
7.5.
Yeah. Well, the live version is probably the most famous for the percussive elements that John adds in. This one has many charming aspects of its own. The drum kit with its narrowed EQ paired with the electric tone in the intro creates a really cool vibe. And even though I gave shit to Georgia for looping that main riff, this one is actually so well thought out and complex that you could have looped it for a 20-minute prog epic. and I would be fine with it.
Finally, something that's just really hard hitting and just makes you become a John Mayer fan. This is what I like John Mayer for, is for work like this. I just wish it wasn't so few and far between. The opening riff is probably the best on the album. Steady drums again, and again, bass player complements the guitar perfectly.
It's also much more interesting drumming with detailed hi-hat work, and John is able to evolve the main riff beautifully and unlike anything we heard from this record so far. Easily the best on the album, probably my favorite John Mayer song. I give it an 8.5.
Something I go back and listen to multiple times. I give it a 7.5.
Now we're talking. Now the album has started finally. We heard the Hammond organ in this record earlier, but it's never been allowed to breathe in the mix like it is here. Another big change up in the sound with heavy focus on the rhythm, but the addition of the orchestra perfectly balances out with great melodies.
3 songs in a row that are finally starting to kick ass and stick out. Lyrically heavy song for this one with good depictions for the listener. He did a really good job storytelling for this one.
Also, some of the more bluesy guitar work we've heard for John on this one, going back to a lot of his earlier influences like Stevie Ray Vaughan as Hero. I give this one a 7.5.
It's a good one. I give it a 7.
83 isn't as much of a musical standout, but it shines with the lyrics, whereas most of the songs up to this point have touched on highly cliche topics about girls and heartbreak. John taking us back to his childhood in detail is refreshing.
Guitar intro is some of the best melody I've kind of heard so far. Like Neon is probably my favorite, but this melody is something that really got my head rolling to it.
On 3x5, I was thinking, what the fuck is that stupid, awful harmonica sound? It sounds like a fucking toy. And then I realized it was actually a toy.
Oh, that's kind of like Kurt Cobain in Drain You.
Except that didn't suck.
Yeah, I agree. When this song kicks in, it's something of a unique intro. Like, I'm actually like, oh, okay, something I haven't heard 8 times already. And then it just gets annoying.
Formula.
That
works. Formula that works. But I will say I love the solo, from the emotion and the playing to the brilliant stadium sound. A little more rhythmically interesting than the other ones, but Formula.
Back to the acoustic work with the little harmonics to back it up. Break into the main riff is well-placed transition, more heartfelt, but again, just very repetitive, something that I could kind of do without.
St. Patrick's Day was a refreshing change of pace with a much slower and moodier vibe.
Can you put a meme of me sleeping? It's probably my least favorite. Yeah. It was just a snooze fest the whole time.
Overall, whole lot of filler. But that's not to say there were some brilliant gems on this one too. John allows his technical skills to definitely shine through at moments, but for the most part he keeps it locked away just in case he might turn off some of the dullard radio listeners, which are traditionally allergic to talent.
It's a strong start, but I think, like you said, I agree. He probably should have been a little more daring, unique. Definitely a lot of filler. Maybe when the record company was like, you need 13 songs or you need more than 10, and he was just like, okay, here.
This would be like drafting Patrick Mahomes because he has an absolute cannon, and then just him throwing checkdowns to the running back every play.
It's like having a master chef like Gordon Ramsay and asking him to make a grilled cheese sandwich.
That being said, I think much of the landscape of 2000s pop and folk music were shaped by this record and its subsequent records too, so I think the reason it may sound generic to us listening to it now is because this really shaped everything going forward.
Definitely not a terrible album. Definitely a good start for someone getting their career off the floor. Definitely someone who I think with his talent and knowledge could be able to throw more of that into his work.
There are flashes of brilliance on songs like Neon, Body is a Wonderland, and City of Love that definitely outshine some of the lower points on this record though, so I give it a 6.5.
I give this one a 6.5 also.